So percentages. A percentage is a number over 100. So 32% is same as getting 32 out of 100. When do we use percentages probably the most? Probably in school when you find out how you did on a quiz or a test. Do you figure out your percentage when you get it back?
Yeah, you got divided by like 8 or something. I don't remember. I don't do it. I don't think I ever learned it.
So if you can change your percentage to a fraction, because it's always over 100, and any time you have a fraction over 100, you can change it to a decimal. So 32% is decimal 32. Here's our first one. If you have 9%, what would that be over 100? 9 over 100. And can you change 9 over 100 to a decimal?
Yeah. Alright. Or would it be 0.09?
0.09, because you have to go to the hundredth spot. Math magician. 23%. Can you write that as a decimal?
Yeah.
So sometimes you might take the step and write the fraction first.
Oh, you don't have to?
And you don't have to if you know that it's 0.23 right away. That's fine as well. %. 0.58. 113%. 1.13. So you could write it as a fraction, 113 divided by 100. And that'll go to its hundredth spot. It's 1.13. Of all the percentages that we've put up so far, this is the one that's hit you the most. 113%. Why? You have experienced 113% more than 58%, more than 23%, more than 9% in your whole life. Why have you experienced 113% so much? Because you go to Dollarama and you buy a chocolate bar, and the chocolate bar says, how much are chocolate bars at Dollarama?
Like 77 cents.
77 cents.
It's like $10.
77 cents for a chocolate bar at Dollarama.
That's really cheap.
And then,
It's like $10.
why is it when you go there, you don't pay 77 cents? They charge you more. Tax.
No, it's 77 cents.
They charge you 13%. And if you would take 77 and multiply it by 1.13, you'll find out how much you have to pay, because you are paying 113% of what the price was. So that's why 113% is something you've experienced more than any of those other numbers, because every time you buy something, you pay taxes. And if you do 77 times 1.13, 85 cents.
To be honest, chocolate bar $1 is 66 cents, but with taxes like 87 cents.
Wait, no, it's dollars for you. You gotta open it up. Gotta go to dollars.
Now, a lot of percentage questions ask you, what is 25% of 200? Because you might be buying something that's 25% off. Percent of means multiply. So when they're asking 25% of 200, they want you to change the percentage to a decimal, 0.25, then multiply by 200, and what's your estimate?
It's 50.
Okay.
No.
It's 94 cents.
2,500.
Well, 25% will be less than what you started with, right? So you're starting with 200. It should be less than 200. You only want 25%. 50% is half, right? 50% is half, so 100 would be 50%. 25% is half of that, and it's going to be 50. And if you type this, if you type that into your calculator, 0.25 times by 200, you will get 50.
Let me try it.
Now, one of the things that, again, percentages is one of the things that you are going to use a lot in your life, and it's really good to be good at it with mental math. We've already learned 10%, right? How do I find 10% of 200? You put the dot to the left, so it would be equal to 20, because this decimal place would get moved 1 to the left when you do 10%. So if 10% is 20, does it make sense that 20% would be how much? If 10% is 20, 20% is double that. 20% will be 40. What is 5% of 200? Be 10, because 5 is half of 10, so you could just take half of 20. And if you wanted to do 25, it'll be 40 plus 10, and you get 50. Another way that people do 25% is if you know that 25% is equal to 0.25, and writing that as a fraction is 1/4, because 25 cents is a quarter, then you could take your number, 200, and divide it into 4. If you have $200 and you have to split it amongst 4 people, how much does each person get? $50. And so that's another way that you could do 25%. Oh, so many ways to do the same question. So much math. So much fun. All right, ready for the next one? Mental math, 10% of 88. 10% is a good one to do mental math because it'll give you an idea of how much you would pay for taxes. Taxes are 13%, but 10% is a good estimate. So 10% of 88 would be, move the decimal 1 over, 8.8. So if you were buying something for $88, really good chocolate bar, you would pay at least $8.80 in taxes, because that's 10%. 13% would be another $2.56 more or something like that. That is an expensive chocolate bar. Most expensive chocolate I have seen is in the Lindt store at Easter. They had a chocolate bunny for $70. This big, solid chocolate bunny, but it was $70. So I think that's the most expensive. No.
I bought a $40 gummy bear.
A $40 gummy bear.
Yeah, it weighed 5 pounds. Yeah.
I went to Dubai once and I bought like this golden ice cream. It's like 24 karat gold ice cream.
What?
It cost about like $300, but we all shared it.
What is 30% off of an item? How do you figure out 30% off? Ooh, I like percentages. These are fun.
10% and then times by 3.
Okay, so you could do 10% and times by 3. Excellent. That's the mental math way to do it. So 10% of 40 is 4. So 30% of 40 would be 12. If you didn't want to do it with mental math, if you wanted to use your calculator, you could change 30% to the decimal. 0.3 times by 40 equals 12. Notice that 3 times 4 is 12? Cool. So 30% of 40 is 12, but if it's 30% off, how much are you going to pay for this? Only $12? How do you figure that?
Plus GST plus PST plus AU.
Yeah, we charge it a triple. We gotta pay Abe.
Careful. If it's 30% off, we have to say, take your $40 and then subtract 12. It's going to cost $28. Does that make sense?
Like it's 10% off. 4.
Yep.
How come 30% of 40 is 12? More percentage off.
Because this is just times by 3. So all I have to do here is times by 3 as well. So 10% is 4. No, that's how much comes off. Yeah, so the 12 is how much comes off. Now, 30% off. One other way to think of it is how much of the price do you have to pay? If the regular price is 100%, you have to pay all of it, and now they take 30% off, does it make sense that you pay, what percentage do you pay? 70% of it. Does that make sense? If 30% comes off, 70% is left. So another way to do this question is say, well, what is 70% of 40? Well, I change it to a decimal and multiply. 0.7 times 40. What is 7 times 4? 28. And we get the same answer if we think 70%. So one way is you figure the 30% and then subtract it to find out how much you'd have to pay. Another way is if something is 30% off, then you pay 70% of the price. You can do that. If it was 20% off, you could say 80%. The nice one's 50% off is the same, right? 50 is 50. So you just cut it in half. So if something is 90% off, you'd only have to pay for 10% of it.
That's a good deal.
That is a good deal.